Good evening, and welcome to The Future We Deserve. My name is Tim Waters, and as a volunteer for Longmont Public Media, I have the good fortune of hosting this program, which is a live conversation with local leaders and a call-in program. So in the next hour, I'm going to have a chance to share with you an A-team panel of local activist experts who have committed their lives to creating and supporting and preserving the common good in Longmont and in the broader community. The conversation tonight and all the conversations in this program really are built on a series of interviews that I conducted in the early stages of the pandemic, in which I had a chance to interview Longmonters and ask them 3 questions. The third of which, what are their best hopes for the post-pandemic future? A future they'd like to help create and move toward. And tonight, we have a chance to build on those conversations with this distinguished group. So it's good to see you all. These are friends and colleagues, and it's really fun to have a chance to welcome you to this conversation. So for the viewers, let me share with you who you're going to have a chance to listen to tonight. And 40 minutes into the program, hopefully, if you're motivated, you'll join this conversation. So I'm just going to work around my screen. Sergio Angeles. Sergio is the executive director of Longmont Public Media. He's a co-founder of Longmont Public Media. He's a co-founder of the Longmont Observer, and he's the president and CEO of Innovate Longmont, one of our young on-the-rise entrepreneurs in Longmont. Marcia Martin is City Council representative from Ward 2. Welcome, Marcia. Nancy Kerr is the director of the Longmont Public Library, and Eric Hozempa is CEO of the Longmont Community Foundation. So, welcome tonight. This is a special opportunity for me, and it will be for the community as well, to listen to this conversation and to join you 40 minutes into the hour. And I'll say again to listeners, 40 minutes into the hour, you're going to see a telephone number and an invitation show up on your screen. And if you'd like to join the conversation, we'd love to have you. I want to start tonight with where I ended with several of you, because you were part of those interviews almost now a year ago. In the early stages of the pandemic, about your best hopes for the post-pandemic future. We're at a point now, even when we started this program early in January, it was hard to know what the timeline might be for moving from a pandemic to a post-pandemic era. And now with vaccines, we see that timeline beginning to accelerate and the possibility to become more and more real for the post-pandemic future. So let's start with what your best hopes are. What's the future you'd like to help create and move us toward? And I'm happy to call on someone or just weigh in. Who'd like to start? Sergio? Now I'm going to call you. You start, Sergio.
I can start. I think I have quite a few different goals. I think to start. So from the Longmont Public Media perspective, I think the vision that I hope Longmont Public Media eventually achieves is that there is a single source of everything going on in Longmont that is captured and watchable on a platform. That includes, educational content, any meetings, classes, all kinds of things. It's just a true public good for Longmont and for residents. And then I think from a more entrepreneurial perspective, I think, a greater involvement and resources for our entrepreneurial ecosystem, having a established no wrong door so that entrepreneurs can find the resources that they need at the right time, and just build that out so that we're a stronger community.
Well, we may, before we're finished tonight, we may come back to the no wrong door ecosystem, because
Sure.
That has particular meaning in the context of a whole economic development initiative sponsored by the Longmont Economic Development Partnership, and you're playing a leadership role, I know, in that part of that initiative. So at the end of the day, that would be a pretty interesting example of, in real time, a public good we're in the process of creating right now. Marcia, pick it up from there.
Well, I seem to recall that in the interview that you introduced us with, My aspirations were about the energy transition and, abandoning fossil fuels and the electrification of both Longmont and the northern Colorado in terms of electricity. And that's a big aspiration. It's doing our part to save the planet. But I'd like to talk about an even bigger aspiration, although it's more local than that. What I want to do is revitalize the concept of the common good. I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of them, when I talk about, we do this for the common good, whether it's something simple like wearing a mask, or whether it's the way we restore our park system after kind of a devastating last summer, or a lot of things, people say, well, that's communism. Well, the words are similar, but it's not communism. The common good means that when we think about doing something, we think about doing it in such a way that it has benefits for all of us in the community. And you can do that. We have time, I'll give you some examples, but that's what I want to think about, is making the common good a good word, and common efforts is something everybody thinks about when they work in the community.
Well, we will come back to words like communism and socialism and common good and sort some of that out, I think, before we're finished this evening. Nancy, you want to pick it up from there?
Sure. I think libraries are frequently thought of as a common good or a public good. I've been involved in this type of discussion before. I worked for one library, for example, system in California that was a privatized public library, and that caused a lot of upheaval in the community about whether a private profit-making company could run a public library. And I have some impressions on that go in both directions. I think the kind of my fervent hopes after COVID, I guess, stem from staring at our giant banner that's outside of the library that we put up before COVID, and it says access equals opportunities. And I said, oh my gosh, to Teresa Myers, our PR person, I wish that wasn't up right now when we close the door. So we've spent a lot of time looking at different ways that people access the library, different ways people don't access the library. I think our main focus now is really looking with kind of that COVID lens, which does clarify some things, at even though we like to think that we're very accessible, for some folks, we're not necessarily easy to get to, for example, or we don't speak their language, or there are other barriers to people's access that really occupy our thoughts pretty frequently now. And I think we've spent a lot of COVID, being pretty inventive and thinking of new ways to reach the community. We're all wearing T-shirts all over town that say "text a librarian," and there are different ways to get in touch with us, but we are very aware that we're not as accessible as we could be to the entire community. So I think that we have a lot of different projects that we'd like to do, but that is really our main focus. We found out, for example, we kind of knew this already, but we did offer more hotspots. We're going to check out computers. We're doing things, but it doesn't help people if they don't know how to use any of the technologies. And why are we one of the libraries in the area that doesn't hold computer classes regularly, et cetera? So we're not just moving furniture around to accommodate our new carpet and paint. We're doing things with a purpose to try and make the library even more accessible and more of a community resource when we're able to open. And that's that common good community resource thing that people missed the most during COVID. When the door was shut, they could check out materials, but they couldn't meet with one another, and they couldn't meet with us. So it's been an interesting year.
Well, I know the purpose of these conversations aren't PSAs, and it's not sharing public information about the city. But before we, I'm going to move to Eric. Before we do that, people will be interested based on what they've read about the library, knowing that we've discovered some things that need some attention in terms of the work that's being done in the library.
Mhm.
Library. You want to just talk a little bit about that, just as a public service?
It's just, it's a lot of it was known about ahead of time. We're part of the same complex as the Civic Center, and the buildings have had their issues with some structural problems that have occurred. I think that it turned out to be more extensive in the library than we had expected, since the library is a much younger building than the Civic Center, but we have a lot of cracks in the floor. And when we took the carpet off, we found more cracks in the floor. And the library is structurally sound. We're not going to fall into the basement, but these are things that needed to be repaired. So we have been really adamant about keeping our curbside services open. We serve about 1 patron a minute every hour that we're open by a curbside. So the staff is amazing, and we've just shifted people all over the place. And we had a gentleman that looked in the window before we opened, and his eyes were just as big as saucers. And he looked in and he said, "What happened?" Because it just looks like a jumbled mess right now. But it's also in the process of being put back together. So it'll look better than ever when we open. It'll be good, safe building for everybody, and we're going to try and stay open through all of it.
And that the work that's being done could easily fall into the category of preservation of the public good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Eric, you're going to back cleanup in this first round. You day in and day out create all kinds of common and public good in a whole bunch of creative ways. Talk about what this means to you and your aspirations for the future.
Yeah, I like what you said, Tim, and I always like to deflect that a little bit and just say we create common good. It's really a board of trustees and community members that actually help create a community foundation. So it's not the Eric Hozempa Foundation, it's the Community Foundation or Longmont Community Foundation, one of 900 community foundations across the country, or if you want, one of 2,000 across the world. So community foundations are set and created to provide, assistance philanthropically, generally speaking, for communities in their area, their jurisdiction, if you will. And we're no different. I mean, we really, our vision is that everyone gets to have a generous and independent life. And that's our aspiration. And so when I say that, we really mean it. We want everyone in Longmont to enjoy an independent and generous life, and to be able to give back, and also to receive, and to also do what they want, and also to be economically free and have opportunity. And I think this last year has just really proven to us that we need to do better. And I think we've looked at, if I look at the community, I just want us to be kind of aspirational in our goals and be okay with being uncomfortable, being okay with uncomfortable conversations, being okay with uncomfortable conversations about race and equity and inclusiveness. And that is a struggle for a lot of us in the community. And I think it's just something we need to do head on and do a better job of it. And I'm going to borrow a phrase from Walt Whitman. He called it after the Civil War, the aftertime. And it's actually, I'm also borrowing a book from Jimmy Baldwin, written by Eddie Glaude Jr. about discussing aftertime. And I think that we have a reset. We have an opportunity to do something that we didn't do for many years after the Civil War, that we actually can make good and move forward in race relations that we never have. So I think, but it's really, this has to be intentional, it has to be directional, and it's uncomfortable, but it's something we should do.
For whatever it's worth, since you teed it up, I'm going to take advantage of it. One of the predicates for this whole series, the future we deserve, and the topics that really are based on what I heard from Longmonters, is an attempt to model what resetting the conversation could look like. Right? This isn't the only way to reset a conversation. But I don't think there's any question that the conversation at every level of our society needs to be reset and refocused and more compassionate, more accommodating, more patient, more characterized by listening, all those things. And that's part of the aspiration for this whole program, is that we can show what that looks like, feels like, sounds like, at a local level, so that maybe you can then amplify it at other levels of society. So again, thanks for joining me in this attempt. So I'm going to be quiet now and see if one of you wants to jump in and pick up what you've heard from one another or where you started. And if not, I'm prepared to come back in and ask some more questions.
Tim, I think that you talked about inclusion, and that is a really good segue from the idea of everyone working for the common good. And everyone, when you think about doing work in the community, you find ways for it to benefit everyone. Inclusion is a necessary part of that, because otherwise you don't know what will benefit everyone. I don't need to say any more than that. I mean, everybody else has got work that they do that has to be thought of that way.
So again, I'm going to pause before I leap on anything here and see if anybody wants to pick it up from there.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Tim, can I chime in and ask Sergio a little bit about
Absolutely.
Some of the things that you're doing for media, and like how you're kind of addressing or like inclusion, and I imagine that's probably a conversation you have quite a bit.
Sure.
That all the things you're doing at Longmont Public Media. So I'm just curious to know what it is that you're working on.
Sure. Before I answer that question, could I actually take a step back? I want to, at least from my perspective, I think I want to set a standard on what the public good means. Like from an economic perspective, I don't know if viewers know how it's defined or any of that, but just wanted to set some groundwork. So a public good is non-excludable, right? So it's costly or impossible for a user or person to exclude others from using that good. And it's also non-rivalrous. So it's when someone uses that good, it doesn't prevent someone else, from using it. So some examples like radio, right? I can listen to the radio, but if I use it, it's not going to kick someone else off, right? Or it's impossible for me to prevent someone from using it. Obviously, there's a bunch of other examples: roads, fire and police, the library, Longmont Public Media. To a certain extent, I think, and that's kind of where I'll get into Eric's question, is with the decline of cable, right, and people not, removing cable, public access has suffered. So from that perspective, you could think of, public access not really being all that public anymore. So what we've been trying to do since we started running maintaining and running the public access contract for the city of Longmont is creating additional distribution channels. So creating a Roku app so people can watch it that way, additional platforms on Apple TV and Fire TV, and all these other platforms that people watch now can also tune in and watch local public access TV. Then there's the actual inclusion of, can we have airing Spanish content and making it a bilingual channel, and we do that now. We air bilingual story time from the library that they do every other morning, as well as providing classes to assist, right, to provide education on how to create media, how to produce it, how to distribute it. So it's definitely been on my mind. I think there are still certain gaps that I think are not yet doable due to technology, specifically when it comes around to bilingual live streams. That's impossible at the moment. You have to go on Zoom and create and have an interpreter join you and set up a whole separate thing. So there's still some limitations that I think the world needs to fix before we can actually solve, access and inclusion.
I'm going to pause. I don't want too long a periods of silence, but I don't want to overmanage the conversation. Somebody want to jump in?
I want to respond to what Sergio just said just a little bit, Tim. That's one area, access to local information is one area that we struggled with a bit at the library during the pandemic, because obviously we get a passel of newspapers. We have folks that's where they get their papers. They come into the library to get their local papers. And, because of COVID, it's hard to sanitize a paper, et cetera. So we weren't we weren't having those available to folks. And, I had even talked to someone when I was working in Washington that I believe had a loose affiliation with the state library. Don't quote me on that. But, he found that there was such a dearth of local information that people wanted to get. He was looking to start a volunteer network within public libraries where people would read the local news aloud. And he said it was very hard for people to find as newspapers began to go by the wayside. Local sports scores, what's on sale at the grocery store. It's the little stuff that he was working initially with folks who were visually impaired, but then found that there were a lot of folks that just had difficulties accessing the local information. So I think that's another thing that, local information about your community is another aspect of a common good or a public good. If you don't know it exists, you're not going to be able to take advantage of it.
Mhm.
So we've struggled with that a little bit too. I was interested to hear what Sergio was saying.
Hey, Nancy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of Audio Information Network, but I volunteered with them to read gardening articles many years ago. And, and I always think that I always thought it was so cool that you could read the newspaper and you could read content. And I always think that it would be really cool for a non-visually impaired audience too, that there are many times where it'd be great if somebody would read the newspaper, but I'm not of the wealth echelon that could have paid somebody to read me the newspaper, nor would I want that look. That would be kind of a bizarre look, but I always thought that would be such a cool media thing to actually offer that as a service, and Longmont Public Media or the library or something like that.
Well, speaking of reading and adding value, I should have commented, Eric, when we introduce folks. You co-host a podcast right now called Side Dish.
Yeah, I do, called Side Dish. Yeah, and so Nancy's been a guest of ours, and it's one of those things where it's a thought about getting information and content out there in a kind of a 30-minute snippet. And I just really believe that that podcasts are a really great way to not only generate conversation, but also to get content out too as well. So
if people wanted to have a chance to enjoy the podcast, how would they do that?
Let's see, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you enjoy your pod content. So reach out to us at sidedishlongmont@gmail.com.
There you go. All right. Nancy, go ahead, Marcia. No, go.
We have here contributors to the common good in big ways and little ways. I was interested to hear Sergio give an economic definition of the common good. And certainly there is an economic definition of the common good, but we use another metric inside the city when we evaluate anything, not just things in the public good commons, but which is a triple bottom line. And that means people, profit, and the planet, or the 3 Ps. And all of those things are in the common good. The planet common good can mean anything from designing restrooms in public parks so that they are always accessible, so that the presence of unhoused persons does not make them inaccessible for the people who live in the vicinity of the park, and vice versa. And that can be done just with engineering. It's kind of a hobby horse of mine right now, because I'd like to see that sort of thing done. And that goes all the way up to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions here in the city and showing the way for other cities our size to get it done, because it's not that easy a thing to do. And people, it's the same way. Benefiting people means inclusion. Benefiting people means doing things so that everyone can participate, and doing the things that people need or want to see done. I think Longmont's been really pretty good about that in the past, because we do a lot of public outreach. Everybody gets a chance to talk. And, I've done things on the city council to make chances for people to talk. I think that that may be the way, my hope that that may be the way to accomplish the reset on the triple bottom line, is to make sure that everybody always gets a chance to talk. It does not mean that the consensus is everything, but it has to mean that the consensus is something. And, you know, if everybody is always thinking not just what's in it for them, but what we can do to make it benefit everyone, there's a lot of room for innovation there. And I think about innovation, you know, it's what I've always thought about. And if you see things from other people's point of view, then you're going to come to a different solution than if you only thought of your own.
So if anyone want to pick this up, I think Marcia, as she talks about the triple bottom line, and you think about social equity, right, as part of the benefit for any kind of economic development, and broader economic value, right, beyond just an investor in a particular initiative. And Sergio, as you talk about the ecosystem or the innovation ecosystem and the work that you've been doing, there are pretty significant implications for social equity, broader social equity, and broader economic impact as a result of what's happening right now with economic development in Longmont. Is that not true? How do you see that?
Yes, that's true. I mean, do you want me to talk a little bit about
Yeah, I know. Yeah, what does that look like? What's the work, and what's the potential benefit, both in terms of social benefits and broader economic benefit value?
Yeah, so this was back when I was working at Longmont Economic Development Partnership, and my role was entrepreneurial development. So I spoke with a lot of entrepreneurs, and being an entrepreneur myself, I knew more or less what was going on in our ecosystem, but also, what are we missing? So taking a look at, if as a Latino, if I wanted to start a beverage company and wanted, to exit and manufacture this beverage worldwide, do I have the resources to do that locally throughout my startup journey? And the answer is probably no. I don't have the capital. I don't have the resources to go, from ideation to validation to startup to growth. It just doesn't exist. So taking a look at, the industries, the target industry clusters that we are envisioning or that we have here in Longmont, do we have resources in place to help all residents achieve those dreams and start businesses that can have that potential? So when I mean a no wrong door, I've also heard it phrased as any door, but really, we have a pretty complex entrepreneurial ecosystem already. And if someone were to start at Tinkermill or the library or the Latino Chamber, they would all get funneled in, and we would all know that someone is trying to start a business, and here's, the type of help that they need. So that then, we can all work together for the public good and help, drive innovation and great businesses locally.
So I want to pivot back if we can. Nancy, you made reference to a privately managed or owned library.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the whole history of the public library, right? We came from. Why do we have public libraries?
Actually, libraries were not available to everyone. Back in the Benjamin Franklin days, libraries were subscriptions only. So those who could afford to use these materials, use the materials. And then, of course, that evolved over time because more and more folks needed access to information, et cetera. And eventually it developed into a public good, but it didn't start out that way. So, the concept, I kind of struggled with the privatized library concept also, but it's a complex issue. The company that runs about 80 libraries throughout the country started out with some librarians that were actually had the goal of rescuing library systems that were going under completely. and modeling efficiency so that they could be saved from extinction. But then it engendered a huge conversation about the common good and whether this public good could have a for-profit entity somewhere in the middle. There are lots of opinions either way, I'm sure, but I don't know.
Hey, Tim, I think there's a really interesting theme here of what I see as democratization, and we talk about that a lot in the foundation space, as this sense that there was kind of this old idea, and I still think there is this prevalent idea of foundations being kind of holier than thou and living in pristine palaces, and you have to go find the gatekeeper to find the access, and really within all the guests here today, it's like truly Sergio has kind of democratized entrepreneurship and media access. I mean, back in the day, you were trying to get media coverage, you had to beg people to get media coverage. And now it is so much more at a level where you can ask for media coverage and usually get a response. And Nancy, I think with the library, it's kind of the same thing. It was kind of this lofty idea, and the library is to be silent and to be holy, and you can't ask too many questions, you can't stay there too long, and it's really become more of a democratized community good or public good. And Marcia, you're talking about access to counsel, and and I know there's coffee chats and other ways to access counsel, and I just applaud all of your efforts in really trying to democratize things, because I think that really is a shift. It used to be kind of the power brokers, and you had to have a special key to have access to everything. And I really see that we just need to move forward with that and making sure people have access to the people who have positions and such. And I'm really excited to hear about all the work that you're all doing. So.
Eric, is the democratization, that's the counter to, Marcia made reference earlier to communism, that some people view the commons, right, as a form of communism, or we hear the term socialism now is tossed around every day, right, in various circles. What's the difference from your perspectives between democratization and the finger wagging people do today about socialism? Because one could argue that much of what you're all involved with, some people would say, well, that's just socialism, as opposed to democratization.
Absolutely. I mean, and I want to be clear, it's a small d, so it's not a big D, but it's really truly just trying to get more people involved and bring the access to the institution, to the foundation world. I mean, we're very open on how we do things, and we pride ourselves in transparency, and I want us to remain in that space, because I just think it's better for people to understand how we work, to make things simple, not more arduous to get money from us. Our job is to push money out in the community. And so if we were to put up barriers and say, oh, you can't have the money and we're not going to do that, and that just makes it more difficult. And we have new board members who are really pushing the envelope about like how much we should distribute. Maybe we should distribute even more, and that's exciting information. I mean, that's exciting feedback too. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. I think that it's flipping things on its end. Like information, if you think about it, years ago was not really democratized, but now with the internet, Facebook, social media, you can make the argument that maybe that's a good or a bad thing. I'm not sure, but I see it as somewhat synonymous with socialism in some ways, but I'm really not astute in political theory, so I'm not going to really speak too much about that. What a little I remember from my days at CU and political science courses, but as far as appealing to a broad swath of people on a greater level and making sure there's equity for people, if you want to call that socialism, I don't know.
Or abundance thinking. Maybe that would be another way to.
I think there's an aspect of faith in democratization. During the pandemic year, and I know we're not supposed to be looking backward, but
we're still in it. So
yeah, we're still in it, because we all felt so confined, and a lot of us were using social media as a way to be less confined. I tried to counter that imprisonment that we were in by making contact with more and more people in the local community, often through social media. Longmont is fortunate enough to have several very large grassroots Facebook groups, and you'd be surprised what you learn by participating in that discussion. And one thing that I have learned is that many people, and these are people who are really trying to help each other, honestly, someone will post that, I need this, or I don't know who can do this for me, but I don't know anyone personally who can, and people will step up. So we're talking about people of goodwill, but they do not believe that the government, that the social context, the infrastructure is there to help them. They have a belief in people in power that are out to become more powerful, that they don't have the same shot as someone who is already powerful. And they do not believe, and this is the big thing that they need, that we people who have any voice need to change, is that they don't believe in the goodwill of the leadership. And I really want to change that. That's my big aspiration. And I see Eric nodding over there, because on the one hand, I don't believe that, at least for the past 20 years, that the leadership in this city has earned that reputation. But on the other hand, I see the frustration of people who are fighting against social pressures, barriers to inclusion, like language, like access to capital, and just access to information. Somebody says, well, I'm going to be evicted. And I said, well, did you try this and this and this in terms of rental assistance? And they didn't believe they were entitled to it, or they didn't know how to access it, and just the least little push in the direction of, you are a participant and you are entitled to these good things, makes a tremendous difference. And I think we need to work very much harder at that kind of communication of membership in the community that people have.
Before we go, I just want to remind viewers that you're going to see a phone number come up on the screen, an invitation to call in if anybody's motivated to join this conversation. And with that, who wants to pick up on what Marcia was just sharing about a perspective on, I don't know how, I don't want to label it, but an unwillingness or a resistance or a frame maybe on leadership in the city, elected or otherwise, and the opportunities that people have to have access or be fully heard. Marcia, is that where you were going with this?
Well, I think it's more more faith that they really do have a voice.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the Facebook groups I'm listened to is called Voice of Longmont, which I think reflects the idea that there's a great desire for people to have a voice, but a lot of people just don't know how to make themselves heard, don't know how to get what's coming to them, and the people who know what services are available, which is all of us here, every single one of us, including you, Tim, we need to do a better job of telling them and inviting them and making sure that inclusion is not just a word we use or an attitude of anti-racism that we foster or whatever, but it has to be made real in the community, person to person.
Anybody want to follow up? Reflect, comment?
That's a hard one.
No, I think that I think, Marcia, you're correct. And one of the things I was kind of thinking about with you were talking about respect for leadership and respect for leaders, and maybe because there is such a kind of a low level, if you will, if you look at national data as far as politicians and other things, and you look at some of the polling data as just far as some of the how it's just fallen pretty precipitously over the years, and how do you gain that back? And I think one of the things that I've often thought about is that we have such a tendency, it seems like, in this country, this city, this community, whatever, to be right. Like, I'm going to die on the Hill because I'm right. And I'm like, in 100 years, will we know that, oh my gosh, I can sleep at night because Marcia was right 100 years ago? I talk to so many people who are just passionate about being right, and they just want to be right. And I'm looking for everybody else for some ideas on that. I just have a tough time bridging that gap. That's family members that I know and community members that I know too. It's fascinating to me as far as how do you get at the public good if somebody is just bound and determined that they're right all the time.
Eric, I have a theory about that, and it's just probably my own and not necessarily a library thing, but I guess what we deal with, and libraries have changed a lot in response to what's going on with this. I think that there are so many voices now that are just clamoring for attention, that folks who believe they're right are just going to find affirmation somewhere on the internet. They'll find a bunch of folks that affirm their rightness. And it used to be that people would research both sides of a question before deciding kind of in their own minds what was right and wrong. And now there's just such a plethora of information sources. And I know our jobs have changed from being providers of information to being interpreters of information. So I think that feeds into it quite a bit. So people come up and they say, I Googled this and I got 37 million hits and I don't know what to do. So that's what our job is now, instead of someone saying, hey, I want to research this topic and find out where I stand on these issues. So
yeah, but Nancy, I was going to borrow on that. I'm wondering, and I'm sorry, I'm a philosophy major, so forgive me. But I find that I attribute that right or needing to be right with a sense of leading an overall purpose for my life.
Yes.
Like, I want to be permanent. Like, I want people to look back 100 years and go, I was right, and for whatever reason, it'll be in the Ethernet, it'll be in the Observer, that Eric was right 100 years ago or whatever, or had a sign put up to him that said he was right. I don't know what that is, but I do find that I'm just trying to figure that out. I'm trying to thread that needle. I should probably be in the philosophical room, Tim. So excuse me, I'll go with that if you want to put me into that one. But anyway, kind of getting back to the common good, I do feel that I think we all need to kind of recognize that life is short. I don't mean to be too kind of glib here, but life is short, and we also need to work together to get things done. And that sounds schmaltzy and weird, but I just think that sometimes there's this perspective that some people feel like they're not going to go somewhere else. They're going to be here and be right all the time or proven wrong. I don't know, but yeah.
Well, actually, it sounds true to me. Not schmaltzy, but just the truth. There are two initiatives, or two potential initiatives, two studies underway that could translate into initiatives that potentially put us in an interesting situation in this town in conversations about rightness or wrongness, right? Who might be right or wrong on a couple of ballot questions, or not, if not ballot questions, development opportunities. One's a feasibility study that's underway right now in the library. And the second is a feasibility study that has been conducted, focused primarily on a performing arts venue and a conference center, right? Running parallel. And I know at least a couple of you have keen interests in those studies and what might become of them. And whatever becomes of them, we will be in a conversation ultimately, relatively soon, about who's right, I suspect. I mean, back to Eric's reflection on this, and if we're going to make the most of those and make good decisions, it can't be just about who's right, who's wrong. It's about what's possible and how do we do this together that has the maximum benefit for the largest number. So Nancy or Marcia, you want to pick up one of you pick up on the feasibility study that you're closest to, and what what people should know, and what your views are and aspirations for how these are treated?
Well, so the STEAM feasibility is I think closer to completion, and it's an interesting story about aspiration as well as about the common good, I think. When I was pretty new on the city council, I was introduced to the conductor of the Longmont City Orchestra. And at that time, I really had no clear idea of how aspirational a city working together could be. I had no idea what our city was able to take on. But I had a coffee meeting with the conductor of the symphony orchestra, and I had recently begun attending the performances of the symphony orchestra, and was in awe of, for a city that's not even for a city the size of Longmont, because I had attended symphony orchestras in St. Louis and San Francisco. And we have a really good symphony orchestra. But I went to our city manager and said, what am I going to do when the conductor of the city orchestra asks me for a concert hall? Because I was pretty sure that was why he wanted to have coffee with me. And to my great surprise, our city manager had an answer. And we sat in Java Stop, Elliot Moore and I, for 2 hours at least, talking about how to get the aspirations of a group of artists made into something that was that could become an aspiration for the whole community. And we had then shortly after that the Longmont City Council retreat, and a very grand vision really coalesced around those retreat discussions, where, you know, we came to the point, well, we've just lost our little bitty convention center, and now that means there's all kinds of visitation business that we can't even address anymore. And, oh yeah, you know, you can't get a bachelor's degree if you can't afford to live away from home in Longmont, because the best you can do is spend 90 minutes on the bus each way into Denver. You know, and so we ended up with this list of what kind of focal points for our community would really raise the quality of life in our community and fill in the gaps in our community. And that became the STEAM project, you know, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And there's an entire vision that I hope everyone who hasn't seen it or heard about it will go and look at on the city website. And now we have Longmont Economic Development Partners engaged in it, excited about it. You know, we raised the money to do a feasibility study, and that's going to be read out very soon now before the city. And so it turns out is that when you are inclusive and you get the public and the private around something that is mutually beneficial, you can do really aspirational things. And I think it's time for Nancy to step in here.
Well, let me just say 2 things. One is Elliot Moore is the symphony director. Harold Dominguez is the city manager, because you were talking about meeting with city manager and then talked about Elliot. He's the symphony director.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Just for clarity.
I thought I introduced him.
The only other observation I would make is that for anybody who's interested, if anybody goes to the Engage Longmont website, and in the search bar you search for STEAM, STEAM, that project page will come up, and you'll get a chance to be brought up to date on the work that was done and the status right now.
Or make
Nancy,
comments.
Yeah, or make comments, right? Offer your perspectives. Nancy, tell us about what we should be
Sure.
anticipating with the
Well,
library.
you know, outside of just our space needs, which, you know, this library that we're in right now was built for a population, depending on what you read, of 65 to 68,000, and obviously we're at what 99,750. So, but it's not just that. It's what do you know? We wanted to know what people in our community thought their library was now, and what aspirations they have, and what things a library could do for them. And I think we have a really great old-fashioned library in Longmont that doesn't necessarily fit what a modern library is. We weren't included in the original STEAM discussions at all. We had a gentleman that came to visit named John Kraska. He's from the only really political action committee for libraries called Every Library. It's everylibrary.com. He came and visited with city council members and some other folks, and he sat there with Harold, and Harold was describing all these STEAM things and the city initiatives and the excitement surrounding that. And John looked at Harold and he said, "Dude, that's a library." And libraries do. I mean, libraries are more now than books. They have been for a long time, but they are meeting spaces. From what Sergio was saying before, many libraries, even some libraries where I have previously worked, we had business incubators, we had business librarians. That co-working spaces, maker spaces, exposure to different, lots of public civic discourse, place for people to have in-depth discussions about some of those difficult topics that Eric talked about before. It's a neutral ground for those type of tough discussions to happen. Folks tend to trust that the library will at least attempt to remain neutral. So we have done part of a feasibility study. It kind of ground to a halt before we reached conclusions at the end or at the beginning of the pandemic, but we're picking it up again. We have another RFQ out for a consultant to kind of look at, we have about 100 and something pages of data now from community members in this community. We had literally thousands of responses to our online surveys, and they were very interesting to us. Some things we expected, some things surprised us. We also had community meetings, and we've also been comparing our different stats and performance measures against other libraries in Colorado and across the country. So our next consultants will come in and really do some financial modeling for us of, everything costs money. So it's one of those things where libraries are a public good, and most of the time they're a really, vastly unfunded or underfunded public good. So, and more when you do these types of surveys, which I've done in other communities as well, you find out that it's an and, it's not an or. So you find out that people want the elements of a traditional library, and they want everything else that's on top of it too. They want citizenship classes and technology classes and meeting space and gathering space and co-working space and all the types of things that the more modern libraries have, and they still want some quiet study space and places to meet in small groups, et cetera. So taking all that raw data and it really extrapolating what it is that people in Longmont need and want from their library. Also had us end up hearing from a lot of folks that said, I didn't even know these things existed in libraries. So that was interesting to me as well. Just that some of the things that we had even put as, kind of options on our surveys, people said, that's in a library. So it was it's been an interesting endeavor so far. And I think, libraries are fitting really well into that STEM and STEAM environment and to business incubator environments and some of the other things that progressive cities need and do. So we're really excited about moving forward and seeing what kind of results.
Well, these aren't the only two, but these are two great examples of opportunity to create public good, right, together. And as we move into the post-pandemic future, and it'll be a test. If I go back to Eric, to your observations about needing to be right, a test of whether or not we can learn our way forward together without some group having to be right at the expense of some group being labeled as wrong, in a zero-sum kind of an approach to this, right? If we can develop and share a bold enough vision of what a community like this deserves and how we create it together in a way that's supportable, fundable, and a gift to generations to come, right? That kind of a mindset. But that's out there. We're gonna have to come to a hard stop here in just a couple of minutes, but I want to give each of you a chance to make any last comments before we do.
You're going to have to call on us or we'll run out of time.
That's
All right, take 45 seconds, Marcia.
Well, I first want to assure Nancy that there is definitely a library space puzzle piece in the STEAM vision. And honestly, I think the reason we didn't come together was a matter of timing. There was a leadership transition going on about that led us blessedly to you. We're going to get it together. And that's why I think our host wanted to bring those two studies together, because obviously they are something that needs to work together to succeed.
Sergio, last thoughts, 45 seconds.
Yeah, I think a couple things. So first, I think maybe some of the main arguments tend to be, whether or not people agree if it should be a public good or not, and then whether we should fund it or how we should fund it. So I think in my vision, looking ahead, I think a lot of things should be a public good. I don't think, and someone please fact check me later, but I don't believe a public good has ever caused any wrong in a community. And, with that in mind, we should have more and we should find the funding, however that may be, to have a better, thriving, innovative, community, and with more resources to have a better home.
Nancy.
I agree completely. Maybe it's greedy of me, but I want all of it for this community. And I think Longmont is a great community. And I think, I don't want it to be one is right and one is wrong. I want the Performing Arts Center too. I want art, I want culture, I want education. So, I just think that this is a really progressive community, and we have, our patrons could not be more wonderful, that come to our library, and we just want to give them more. So, finding ways that, the funding is the tough part, and that's what we're working on now, is that financial modeling. But, I think Longmont deserves a lot of things. So I can't wait to see what happens going forward. But it's going to take that collaboration in order to make those things happen.
Eric, you're a cleanup again. Last words.
Sergio, I can think of two examples about that. We'll meet off the line and we'll talk about that. But I have to say, my mantra for actually doing the job that I do and for kind of living my life is this one: some see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not. And Bobby Kennedy. And I always think about that quote when I'm doing my job. And I think we should be aspirational. I think we should be seek a better public good and a better community. So.
And the only thing I'm going to add to all that is because I've been a part of some of this discussion about the library feasibility study, and a lot of the metrics offer what averages are in Colorado and where we are relative to average. And I've, in conversations with Nancy, I've shared, nobody gets up in the morning and aspires to be average, right? We get up in the morning and we want to be best in class. And I hope when we see the results of these feasibility studies, it inspires all of Longmont to think about what it means to create world-class public good and that are best in class in terms of standing. And I have to say, best in class is what this panel is. I'm so grateful for your time tonight. More importantly, I'm grateful for what you all do, you four do every day, because I know enough about you and your work to know what extraordinary contributions you make to the life of this community. So as a resident, as a taxpayer, I am grateful for who you are and what you do. Thank you. And to viewers of this program, if you like the program, let your friends and neighbors know. If you don't like the program, it would be really helpful to get some feedback on what I ought to be doing to make this more relevant and meaningful for the community. I've closed every one of these programs with this post from Seth Godin, an individual I don't know, but a post that had particular meaning for what we're trying to do here. I'm going to read it again. We can choose to commit to a recursive and infinite path that elegantly creates more of the same. We can choose possibility. We can choose connection. We can choose optimism. We can choose justice. We can choose kindness. We can choose resilience. And we can decide to take responsibility. Each leads to more of the same. I hope these conversations lead to more of the same. Thank you to this group. Thanks to viewers, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks when the topic of conversation is my rights and our responsibilities in the future.